If you've loved someone who has struggled with drug or alcohol addiction, you know how difficult it is to get that person help, the help that they need to overcome the addictions. My guest here today is Richard Casey. He is a founding partner of Robinson Casey, which is located in Palm Beach, Florida. And you may be asking, Jennifer, why do you have an attorney from Palm Beach, Florida on your show today? And that is because he and his partner have a very unique practice that really uses a Florida law called the Marchman Act to help families across the country get help. And he's here today to talk with us about how that process works and his own personal journey that led him to this area of law. Richard, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate being here.
Absolutely. So let's just start off with the personal question of what is the area of law that you practice and how did you come to practice that?
Yeah, so thank you. And the area of law we practice is really helping families get their loved ones to treatment. One of the main tools that we use is the Marchman Act. Like you said, it's a Florida-specific law that can allow families to petition the court to get their loved one brought into a treatment facility of their choice and require that they participate in that treatment for a 90-day period.
And they don't have to be residents of Florida in order to apply under this act. Is that right?
No, they don't have to be residents of Florida. They don't have to be citizens of the United States. They have to be physically located in Florida when we initiate the process. But there are a variety of ways that we've worked with families to get their loved ones to get to Florida, whether it be for vacation or maybe someone's willing to commit to 5 days in a treatment environment, but they're not willing to stick through and actually follow through with the recommendations. And we do know that the longer someone is in treatment consistently, the greater their chances of success. So from a compliance standpoint, even as someone who might be willing to walk in the door, but doesn't stay or has a history of not staying, an act like this can be life-saving.
And we're going to walk through sort of what the details, how that process works and what that looks like. But let's back up for a minute and talk about how you came into this area of practice.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you asking. And my unique situation is that recovery is pretty pervasive throughout my family, including myself. I myself have been in recovery. I'm about 9.5 years sober. And I've been fortunate enough to have had the opportunity to go to a quality treatment facility that was longer term. I had been to prior treatments before that weren't as long term, and my success wasn't as good. But I've also had my father pass away from alcoholism. I have cousins that are in recovery, aunts and uncles, and then I still have family struggling with addiction. And so it's something that really has impacted me on a personal level from a lot of different angles in my life. And it just became clear to me that if I wanted to practice law and I wanted to care about what I did, that I needed to do something that made a difference for families with loved ones suffering from addiction.
Thank you for sharing that. What was it about you said you had gone to earlier treatment programs and they were shorter, and then you went to a treatment program and it looks like it really took hold and has flourished, has helped your life flourish. What was it about that program that made the difference, or about you and where you were when you went to that program?
I guess I didn't know the difference, and I don't think anyone in my family knew the difference. It's really hard for families to know what to do before they've ever had to do it, right? It's not something that's talked about. It's not something that's really shared amongst friends or brought to the Thanksgiving dinner table. It's very hush hush and under, in behind closed doors. So no one really gets the expertise from those people that have been through it before, and they don't know where to turn because they're not sure who's actually been through it, and they're worried about sharing their own experiences that they're currently dealing with, and it's a crisis. So the first time we just didn't know. And I think that people were scrambling to try to help me, and I was more resistant. I had my own preconceived biases against what this might mean for me. I was a young man. I was 23 years old the first time, and I was 25 when I got sober. But that period of time between the two was more than enough for me to realize I needed to do something different. But what to do, right, still became the question. And I was given an opportunity to go to a longer term treatment program. It didn't sound like that great of a deal to me.
And what do you mean by long term? Like, what is the difference? What's considered short term and what is long term?
Well, a lot of the traditional model of treatment was broken up into just two real categories: inpatient and outpatient. And that's been broken up, and there's a variety more levels of care. There's detox, there's residential, there's partial hospitalization, there's intensive outpatient, there's outpatient. And the traditional model of like a substance use detox, a farm, right? As some people may refer to them, was just 28 days. And it was actually from a military leave where it was 4 7-week periods. So that was the maximum they could get for that leave. And so the 28-day model became. So a lot of people think that like the 28 days and you should be fixed. And really there's an underlying issue besides whether or not you're putting drugs or alcohol into your body. And that is, why are you doing that? And that can take a lot longer than 28 days. And so they need a system of care, right? There's a detox period, then there's the residential, then there's the partial hospitalization. So I had to go through a much longer period. And I didn't know that going into it. So I did the detox and the residential. I was done with my 28 days and I just decided that I was done. And they said, there's this next step in life. And it would be in the outpatient bucket. I would live in a community of people going through a similar thing as me in an apartment style living. I would have a regular schedule of clinical activities. I would be within one system of care where the same staff are managing me in both locations and overseeing me. And they're going to challenge me to change a lot about what's going on in my life. They're going to hold me accountable for the things that I hadn't been held accountable for in my life. And they're going to work with me to improve how I feel about myself and why I'm resorting to alcohol and drugs, to change my internal experience based upon what I'm experiencing externally versus building the necessary skill sets that one should have inside themselves to process and move through even the most difficult of things. So the loss of my father was really a big catalyst in my downfall and how I turned to alcohol and other substances to cope with that grief and loss.
And that was after your initial 28-day stay?
It was not. My father actually passed away from alcoholism as well as other complications. And that happened when I was 21. And my downfall began much more rapidly following that. I just don't think that I had the proper coping mechanisms to deal with the grief and loss of my father at such a young age, especially since the mechanisms I was taught in my environment were alcohol use for both good and for bad by my own father. So what I thought I would use as the way of processing my pain, I turned to ultimately led to a much faster downfall for myself.
Sure. And I'm thinking about this as a 21-year-old man, whether you're really aware that this is what you're doing is you're processing the overwhelming grief and loss by turning to alcohol, or it was just sort of the default. Like it wasn't really conscious thinking this is just what happens.
I think that's just when I knew what to do.
Yeah.
Right? I don't think at 21 I actually had a conscious thought. I think that I had been taught through watching someone else's behavior, and I had been taught by the reward system that your mind naturally goes through, where like you use this substance, you have positive experience, you equate it as good, right? That when I lost my dad, it was so painful that I was looking for any opportunity to feel different than that. And so I just kind of began to increase the frequency to which I was using.
Sure.
And it was just trying to escape the pain. And I think that's what happens to a lot of people. And then all of a sudden the actual substance then begins to take hold on its own. Yeah.
And really it impairs your ability to be making conscious choices when you
there's such short periods of respite between the two. When you choose to use again, and it becomes really tough. And I obviously have learned a lot since then. So I have a different perspective than I would have had at 21 or 23 or 25.
Did your family do any kind of like intervention? Is that and we can talk about that, maybe what you've learned now about that process, but there's a whole lot. When I think about intervention, I think what I've seen on TV, and how that plays out.
Honestly, we actually work with some of those interventionists that you see on TV. So that is a lot of what it's like. But when you're watching any television show or even this podcast, there's going to be cuts and edits, right? And you're not going to see the entirety of it, and you may only see the most dramatized pieces. But I did an intervention for my father. So when I was about 20 years old, I had to attend an intervention to get my father to go to treatment. And that was a pretty significant experience. So I have been exposed to that on a personal level as well. I had to say things that I found to be very difficult as a family member, to hold my father accountable as a 20-year-old man, telling his 51-year-old father like what he was going to do or what consequence he would face in our relationship. But it was the most important thing. I actually got another year out of his life, and that year he was primarily sober for, where I wouldn't have had those life experiences had I not done that. So it's worth everything. And the Marchman Act itself is a form of intervention, which is a lot, more direct and a little bit, more capable of controlling the length of time that someone commits to it. But I had my own type of family style intervention. And a lot of families choose to use this method too, where the most important people in their lives tend to kind of want to engage them first as a group to show a unified front and a consistent message. And it's important to get on the same page. And so an interventionist who is a clinical professional, who's trained to conduct interventions, can meet with your family, can help guide you through this process. One of the more important things is you don't know what to do as a family, and everybody has a different opinion of potentially how strong, how soft, what direction, where to give, where to take. Whereas an interventionist is going to be able to clarify, hey, we do this regularly. We want to be on the same page. I know that you have this type of, stronger approach, and you have this type of softer approach. We probably both want to be in the middle, right? We want to be assertive and clear and compassionate and persistent and maintain boundaries, even if the loved one who's suffering from addiction is trying to press us. There's sometimes I like to call it a game of chicken, because at times the person who's suffering doesn't want to change so much that they want to try to force the family to have to give up because they're not able of withstanding the emotional pain that the loved ones may be willing to challenge them with.
Oh my gosh, that just sounds really, really intense.
It can be. It's a crisis.
Yeah, it's a crisis. But having a loved one struggling that you care so deeply about is a crisis.
Exactly.
So let's talk about the Marchman Act. What is it? And it's a Florida law, correct?
It is. It's a Florida law, and we're the only state that really has it set up this way. But every state has been looking for ways to try to help people with substance use and mental health. More often than not, they have some type of statutory system for people suffering from mental health conditions. And there are assessing facilities that you may become familiar with at hospitals. What's unique about Florida is it has both. They're separate laws. And the Marchman Act is specific to those suffering with substance use and co-occurring disorders. So they can have a mental health issue or not, but they have some substance use. And even that substance use that's just enough to make their mental health condition that much worse, this law applies to. And what we really have the opportunity to do is file a petition with the court asking for them to grant a order for up to 90 days in treatment, and also ask for an emergency law enforcement pickup and assessment at a private treatment facility. So some of the greatest things about this is that you don't have to go to a hospital. Some counties do have select facilities. Other counties allow you to identify the exact treatment program you want to start at. And so if you contact our firm, we're able to work with you to curate kind of a treatment experience. So your loved one may come into the state of Florida into a particular county. We then could petition the court to have them brought to a particular treatment facility that could be at any level of any level of care, but any kind of quality of socioeconomic status that your loved one falls into. We work with some programs that are high-end executive treatment programs that are more than $100,000 a month. And we work with in-network insurance contracts. And we have everything in between. Out-of-network programs, cash pay at much lower, daily and monthly rates. And so we can kind of find what's going to be the best solution for someone's family member, and we can bring them there kind of right away. We don't necessarily have to go into the psychiatric facility and then wait for the psychiatrist at that facility to make a determination. The family has a little bit more control in following up with the court, asking for these long-term treatment plans, selecting what treatment program they want their loved one to be in, and really just kind of providing them with a quality of care that resonates with the needs of their particular loved one.
And that sounds so amazing. What a great resource. But I have to tell you, the lawyer in me is just asking what kind of due process protections are in place so that if, somebody just invites me on a family trip to Florida, I'm not going to suddenly end up in a 90-day treatment ward. So what does that look like? What has to be proven, or
sure.
Does the person have a lawyer who's...
And a lawyer would be appointed to anyone who cannot afford an attorney, or if they have a mental health condition that requires they need one. They have the right to have an attorney at every stage of the proceeding. So if they have the resources to afford their own, they could hire their own. The first phase, where you do get the request for the law enforcement transport to the facility, is a shorter term period of time. So there is essentially two different burdens of proof that need to be met. The first is whether or not an emergency exists, and you have to have a reasonable belief that an emergency exists, and that can grant an assessment, which would be for a 72-hour period. And then once they arrive at the facility, if the facility who's licensed by the state of Florida to perform these types of assessments and treatment determines that they have a need to detox, or they have some other medical condition that needs addressing, they can continue to hold that person for their own safety while a hearing is already being scheduled.
Okay.
So the hearing is already being scheduled, the attorney is already being appointed, and we're already proceeding. And that hearing is supposed to happen within 10 days of the initial request for police pickup. There's a 72-hour assessing period, and they can keep them until that hearing. But at that hearing, that's when a determination is being made about, right, do they meet the criteria at a higher burden, right? So do they meet the criteria at a clear and convincing level versus just a reasonable basis?
And so that's what you're doing. I imagine when you're meeting with families, is you're first trying to assess, is there really an urgent situation here? And are they going to meet the criteria?
Yeah, we've essentially turned away cases where families are talking about their 17-year-old who doesn't really have any co-occurring mental health conditions, but they don't like that he smokes pot. Like, right. Okay, that's understood. I don't necessarily like that either, but if he's never been asked whether or not he's willing to go to treatment before, he doesn't have any kind of co-occurring mental health or any, medical conditions that would be exacerbated by their particular use, then sure, they're not going to necessarily meet the criteria. One of the protections built into the law is that at the hearing stage for longer term treatment, one of the requirements is to prove a history of lack of compliance with treatment for substance abuse. And to clarify, you have to have proof that you've tried this before and they were not willing to follow the recommendations. So it really applies to people who specifically have been bucking the system, so to speak, what their professional providers have been recommending for them.
I see. So this is not really your first step. If you've got a loved one who's struggling with addiction, it's not necessarily the first call is to invoke the Marshman
It shouldn't
Act.
be. But one of the difficult things is, in particular, it's like if you always refuse to get any help ever, then you still have to find a way to get them help. And this can certainly be a tool for that as well. And a lot of that time does come with really severe mental illness. So we do a lot of work with families who have loved ones who are suffering from different psychotic episodes, who they maybe have what is becoming more common, which is cannabis-induced psychosis. And families don't really know what to do with it. There's a whole entire network of parents around the country trying to figure out how to solve this problem. But yeah, their loved ones are going into psychotic episodes of delusion and hallucination, and the only common thread is that they're using cannabis and nothing else.
I was just going to ask you. So, I mean, I back in the day, I always thought cannabis was harmless, illegal, but in Texas, but harmless. But I'm hearing more and more about the cannabis-induced psychosis. Like, what is that, and why is this something that's like?
Yeah, cannabis-induced psychosis, or CIP, is a diagnosable substance use condition, and that is becoming more and more common. I do think that there are two main things. Now, I'm not a clinician or a doctor, but I do two main things that we've seen that tend to be correlated with loved ones who do have that. And then there is also individuals who have underlying mental health issues, and cannabis is exacerbating them. And those are actually different things. So we do work with both of these types of families, but just cannabis-induced psychosis, where there's no underlying mental health at all, you actually don't know if there is underlying mental health at all until afterwards. But what it is it tends to be the high concentration of much stronger THC levels. But there's also two different types of THC that's currently available. There's Delta 9 and Delta 8 THC. And ultimately, a federal act allowing for hemp to be utilized in some more commercial grade products, consumer grade products, does allow for Delta 8 THC to be sold around the current laws, because it's technically a derivative of the hemp plant. And so the way that laws mostly are written, they're actually criminalizing Delta 9 through the sales process, and not Delta 8, which is through the extraction of this chemical directly from hemp. And what they're doing is essentially it's like a concentrate. Because there's not enough of this THC in the hemp plant, so they have to take more and more and more and more hemp plants to get this small amount, and then combine it and concentrate it into oils, ultimately you see in a lot of these vape pens. And these are things that are sold legally over the internet, that there's no kind of federal prohibition against, but there's no kind of guidelines or regulations about what's safe or what's not. So we tend to see a lot of cannabis-induced psychosis associated with Delta 8. And then we also tend to see a lot of cannabis-induced psychosis in states where cannabis has become more legal, because the potency of the substances continue to increase and increase and increase. And so regardless of whether you're in a state that criminalizes it, decriminalizes it, or has it available for medical purpose, or entirely legal and regulated, you're seeing an increase in cannabis-induced psychosis, because they do have access to either Delta 8 or really high potency Delta 9.
And so what is cannabis-induced psychosis? Like, what are the symptoms?
So there's clinical criteria, and you're best off looking that up in cannabis-induced psychosis, CIP, online, either the DSM or where they can actually outline the traits. But primarily what you'll see from symptomology is that someone is suffering from what appears to be a lot like schizophrenia. They're going to either have like a bipolar with psychotic features, or a schizophrenia type of appearance. There may be degrees of delusion, not just delusions of grandeur, but like true hallucinations, true belief in God speaking to them, right? Over fascination and fantasization of particular, people talking to them, having relationships with people that don't exist, or the people that are like clearly too prominent in society that actually communicate with your loved one. And they will talk to themselves. They will kind of go into like more violent outrages or outbursts. They probably will end up psychiatrically stabilized in your own region at some point if the cannabis use doesn't stop. And it's not being diagnosed at that stage, because psychiatric facilities are designed to look at and to identify mental health issues. And most people trying to protect their substance abuse lie about their substance abuse. So when they arrive at a hospital, it's very common for an individual suffering from a condition, a mental health condition that's also abusing substances, to say that they don't use any substances out of fear of being arrested.
Sure.
If it's a crime to, use cannabis in Texas, and someone's going to the psychiatric facility of a doctor and they ask, do you use cannabis? The inclination is to say no.
Right.
But that leads to a diagnosis that says, oh, this can't be substance use oriented. And so then it becomes either a schizophrenia or a bipolar with psychotic features type diagnosis.
Oh my gosh, it's so overwhelming.
It's a lot to take in.
So what are you seeing? Like, I want to talk about kind of the upside is you're getting to interact with these families at their very worst time. I imagine a total time of crisis, and taking their loved one into custody and then seeing them through a 90-day treatment program.
Yeah, and the custody piece is probably the hardest part of it for a lot of families. They're like afraid about what that looks like, and so they're calling, and they know that it's extreme. It's a big step for them to take this type of leap, and then they're really anxious, and they're calling out of desperation, but they're also calling out of research and uncertainty, and they really just want to see their loved one prosper in society, in life,
of course,
and be healthy and well. And so we try to take a soft approach in giving them the information and letting them make decisions and guiding them towards treatment facilities that would be helpful for them. If we can arrange for their loved one to walk in the door of a treatment facility, we can still file this petition. And instead of the law enforcement pickup, we would get a court order requiring that they remain. And then we have them served by a private process server. So we can kind of, dilute the experience, so to speak, of the extremeness of it. If we can get someone to commit to a minimal amount of treatment. So we don't have to get them to commit to these 30 days, these 90 days, if we know that that's the burden or the barrier. And we don't have to have them on the street currently in the position of using to be able to file. We can still try to get them quickly to safety and then file and have them transported or required to remain from a safe location. So what we really see is mom, dad, daughter, son, spouse calling and not knowing. They've tried. They don't have another place to vent. They're concerned about the stigma. They don't know anyone who knows anything. They may have hired professionals to assist them already, which is a great resource. They may not have, and they just need someone to help them understand what their options are. But for loved ones who are suffering from having a loved one with an addiction, for families that don't know another alternative, it's a great resource to kind of figure out if I can't get them to do it, right, which I've tried so long and hard to do before, like, am I out of luck or is there another choice? And it may not be your first choice, but there is another choice and a plan can be put into place. And I don't like to talk about or highlight necessarily just the part of the emergency pickup. I think the better value of using the Marchman Act for families is that someone who is going to dry out and detox, do their 28 days and tell everybody that they're okay. They're going to look good. They're going to look so much better than you've seen them in years. But they haven't done anything to actually change what got them there in the first place. So the Marchman Act can get them to do that up to 90-day order. It also can be extended for additional up to 90-day periods, so long as they continue to meet criteria. And you can create a plan where they go from detox to residential, to partial hospitalization, to IOP, and even to outpatient with a recovery residence for 90, 180, right? 9 months, a year even, depending upon it, how significant their condition is. Not everybody needs extensions, but families can actually put into a plan long-term treatment, especially for those families that have been struggling for so long. And
then what do you see on the other side when the 90 days or even longer is up? What's the experience on getting to kind of see that transformation happen?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's pretty amazing, right? It's obviously not everybody's going to get, find recovery, whether or not they find recovery voluntarily or involuntarily. Our kind of analysis is similar to what you see from case studies, which is like the VA did a study on whether or not there was any statistically significant difference between voluntary and involuntary treatment through in veterans who had gone through the veterans court systems for recovery, and there's no difference. There's no actual change in outcome. So there's just as likely to get sober as someone who goes on their own. The difference is that if you don't go on your own or you don't stay the length of time you're supposed to, your chances do drop.
So it's the length of stay is what's going to really be determinative for the overall success.
Exactly. And so what you're trying to do is improve their length of stay and get them to be at the right level of care for the right amount of time, instead of for them to say, okay, I'm better. I'm done with this hard work. I want to just go back to the comfort of my own life. My experience and the reason why I got different was someone put it specifically to me. My uncle looked at me and he said, I'm done. He was just like, I've been sitting here for 4 hours trying to convince you to do something that you clearly don't want to do. You can either take the help I'm giving you or you can go right back where you came from. And I knew I didn't want to go right back where I came from. But a lot of people do. And that's where they're trying to go back to. But when they try to go back to the same job, back to the same environment, back to the same life, they're really saying they want to go back to the same drinking, back to the same drugging, back to the same behavior. So they're not quite ready. Until they're ready to change their life entirely and move in a different direction. So while we're trying to continue to keep them in this treatment program, what we're doing is we're hoping that they'll say, you know what, you're right. I should continue down this path. Not, no, I'm fine. Let me go back.
Let me go back. Yeah, that's the big indicator.
Yeah, you're like, no, there's no back. There's only forward.
Wow, there's so much good information here. I just real quick, as we kind of wrap up our time in this interview, what message of hope do you have for somebody who has a loved one who's struggling right now with alcohol or drug addiction?
Yeah, I think that recovery is not only possible, it's probable. There are so many more tools before. Obviously, there are 12-step fellowship programs that started with at the time where alcoholism was considered a hopeless condition of mind and body. And I do believe very much in 12-step programs, but it's not a hopeless condition. There are resources and tools available. There are interventionists and case managers and treatment options and tools that families can really use. It is an emotional and challenging lift for that family member at home. And they have to do their own work on themselves. If they continue to behave the way that they've behaving, they're going to get the same results that they've been getting as well. So sometimes it does start with you and choosing to do something that you've never done before in order to help your loved one choose to do something that they've never done before.
Is such a good point. I would imagine that is such a critical piece of the overall success in rehabilitation is the family dynamic system changing.
It's incredibly important and it's underemphasized. But really, if you want to see your loved one change and get better and save their life, you're going to have to take an action and a step on a regular basis that you've never taken before. And it's going to be worth every bit of turmoil in the process.
Oh, that's excellent, Richard. Thank you so much for coming to visit with us from Florida and to spending time talking with us about how we can really help people who are struggling. You're an incredible resource.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here.
We're going to include a link to Richard's law firm website where you can learn more information and reach out to him if this is something you're interested in learning more about. We hope that you'll like and subscribe to our channel and stay tuned for future episodes. And we appreciate your time with us today. Thank you.